Business planning in the economics of hemp production is a kind of an area that I've been pretty passionate about. And I've been working on this since 2014 in the state of Kentucky, working closely with our Kentucky Department of Ag there, and trying to put together some of this information. So one thing that really comes to mind when I think about this crop is there's a whole lot of words. There's expensive, failure, uncertainty, risky, growing pains, and you can go on and on and on. And these are topics that continually come up for me. And I think they're issues that this industry is still going to continue to confront going forward for the next several years until we get, until this crop becomes more of a mature crop like we think about a lot of the other commodities. But keep in mind, we've only been at this since 2014, so it takes time. So I will say, and through a lot of my work, growing pains has been one of the key things that I would say is one of my key mantras, that this industry has a lot of growing pains. So what is hemp really? I really think about hemp as being a tool in the tool belt. So a lot of people tell me it's a silver bullet. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think it's a crop that you got to figure out how it fits into your scheme or into a scheme. How does it work in the crop rotation going forward? So, you know, how does it break pest cycle? Does it break disease cycles? How does it really fit in that? So hemp is really just a tool in the tool belt for me, and not the end all be all. This economic report is out there. This is a project that we did for the Economic Research Service. It was released earlier this year. We looked back at the 2014 Farm Bill, and we really thought that the 2014 Farm Bill, you know, was you know, going to be done and over with come, you know, October 31st of this year of 2020. Well, lo and behold, what was going to be old is now new again. We've kicked the 2014 Farm Bill to September of 2021, which is going to see, which is going to, you know, create some additional issues and some additional heartburn when we come to 2021, with a lot of confusion potentially as growers who planted in 2021. Now, if they harvest after September 30th of 2021, is that going to be grandfathered into the 2014 Farm Bill? Is it going to be grandfathered, or does it go into the 2018 Farm Bill? And we also are going to continue to have states that operate under the 14 Farm Bill and not the 18 Farm Bill. So we're going to have a mix of two farm bills in there as well. So that's going to continue to be an issue, but this report is out there. It's one of the only ones that talk about the economic viability of this industry. One of the key things that came about out of that report is the lack of information out there available on this industry. And I'm sure if you're in any type of these industries that we're talking about, you want to go find some data and try and put together your own thought process and look at the data and see what it's telling you. Well, this is just one example. So these are acres reported by states in the bright blue bars, FSA acres in the gray bars, and then the dark bars are vote hemp acres. And we got greenhouse space in here as well. What you see is there's a tremendous discrepancy between the acres. One thing that you can tell is a consistent upward trend in production. We're still seeing that upward trend as of 2020, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But one thing that we're really trying to bring to this industry, and hopefully in the next year or so we'll actually be able to do this. We currently have a project now with AMS. We're going to survey all hemp producers across the U.S. in 2021 to gather cost of production information and really start to lay a foundation of solid data that we can actually go forward and make decisions on. So that's something that will be coming out very soon. But reports like the economic viability report that we did help drive some of that and help us get some funding for that. This is just a graphic. This is out of FSA acres. One thing you will see is this is the total planted hemp acres from 2015 to 2019. I haven't got 2020 added in here yet, but you can see the rapid expansion of this across the US. One thing I will tell you is that this data is missing observations. FSA data is typically only collected for those farms that have other commodities or crops that they produce and fill out that FSA 578 form. Some of the new and many of the new producers that are entering into the hemp market may have never produced before, so they may not be familiar with that FSA process, and have never filled out that form before. So this, I know, is missing acres and missing counties, but it does give you a feel for how much this is expanded across the country. And as we continue to go forward with more and more states, more and more tribal nations entering into this market, this map is going to continue to fill out. And then we could talk about some competitive advantages of essential oil production, where might that take place, versus grain production versus fiber production. But this is just total acres, so it's a mix of everything. Licensed hemp acres in 2020, what we are seeing is we had another increase of, this is just in licensed acres, 465,000 as of June 18 of 2020. So this is another increase, kind of relative, or sorry, we got a slight decrease from 2019, but we did have an increase in number of growers. So we still have a lot of interest in people wanting to grow the crop. We did have a slight decrease. I will say, for like the state of Kentucky, we went from 20,000 harvested acres in 2019. We're down to about 4,000 to 5,000 harvested acres in 2020. So we've had a significant decrease. We had a lot of growing pains in the state of Kentucky. Lots of companies come in. We've had some early bankruptcies. Lots of things contributing to that, but I think those producers that made wise decisions early on and built some really good relationships are still in this industry and still making profit out of it. Also included this is out of Pan-X Exchange. This is kind of gives you a feel for across the country where a crop's being produced. In the Northeast, you're going to see that only 2% of the acreages was in the Northeast. However, I find this really interesting because the Northeast brings a lot of unique characteristics and qualities. If you look at the Northeast, they tend to be a lot of smaller farms. They also tend to be a lot of boutique, specialty crop type farms. And I think as this industry continues to mature, what you're going to see is in the Northeast, maybe for smokable flower and other specialty cannabinoids, the Northeast may be a really good location to do that because they're on smaller operations. That's not always the case, but just something to think about for the Northeast. You see a lot of production in the West, so Colorado, Oregon, Montana, a few other states. A lot of the acreage is out there. 19% in the Southeast. A big chunk of that's Kentucky, North Carolina. Florida's coming on, and a few other states as well are producing a lot in that region. I kind of also wanted to throw this in here too. This is as of October, what is kind of the status of all the states. So you're going to see a lot of these states, especially in the pink, operate under the 2014 pilot program and continue to operate. So New York is one example that was going to go under the USDA program, and under the USDA program, they would have moved all their producers under that. However, once they approved the 2014 Farm Bill to get an extension, they were allowed to then come back out, and now they're going to participate under the 2014 pilot program. And yes, under the USDA program, participants are required to report their acreages to their FSA locations. However, you operate under the 2014 pilot program, you may not have to answer this or to fill out that 578 form. Once we get to the 2018 Farm Bill, yes, everybody will have to fill out that FSA form. So Maine may still continue to operate under the 2014 pilot program as well. So you're going to see some other states. Kentucky will probably move to a pilot program, back to the pilot program as well. We just haven't made all those decisions. So we're going to start to see, we'll see some of that continue to play out in the coming weeks. Okay. So I want to put in some of this in here. These are a lot of fiber budgets that we pulled down to compare across some different states and different regions. So if you look at on the far right is the Kentucky budget. I will say that if you look at some of the new Pan-X Exchange data that says price should be somewhere in 12 cents a pound for fiber that would put this as a positive number. One question in the chat is, what is FSA? FSA is the Farm Service Agency, which is a USDA governmental agency. Just so that anybody in the chat that was unaware, sorry, I get acronym and alphabet soup with all the USDA agencies that are out there and play in this space. Cornell, this is an older budget for them, but they say $248 an acre, return over total costs. North Dakota is 84, Penn State's 246, 27. So you can kind of see that there are quite a few differences across the country in terms of what we include, what we don't include. I would encourage each of you, if you really want to dig down into the details of this, go download the budgets for each one of these areas. They are out there on the web, publicly available to find. So go look at those. You can see differences among what all's going on. Grain, a lot of the same thing. You can see a lot of differences across the U.S. For this sector as well. Cornell has one of the highest ones out there. What I will say is some of the Panex exchange data that I have seen come in on pricing, prices have gone down on this side. Some of them talk about 50 cents a pound, which our budget at the University of Kentucky is built on 70 cents a pound. A lot of that has to do with discounts that that are taking place within the system. Once that has to do with moisture, quality standards, so on and so forth. Other big differences, as I said, go to their websites, check out these. Because I don't know off the top of my head, or I don't remember all the details that goes into each one of these, except for the University of Kentucky. Okay. One question that did come up in the chat is 12 cents per pound for fiber. Is that typical price for material fully processed? That's not fully processed. That's at the farm gate. So leaving the farm will get paid 12 cents a pound for that fiber. So now granted, you could talk about the fiber industry as kind of an odd duck in that depending upon what the end use of that fiber is, that may change what that payment is. So for example, in Kentucky, we have Hemp Wood, which is a company that uses fiber to make flooring products. They are not really they don't really care about the quality of it, so to speak, because they're going to press it all together and glue it together and create a laminate floor type product versus other companies, maybe like Panda Biotech, which is in Texas, and others that are out there as well, are really focusing on how do I take the bast apart from the herd and what is the important components of that, and they may price that differently. So that is another detail you may want to think about within that space for the fiber side. Most of you are probably focusing on CBD comparisons, and actually let me answer one or two questions in the chat. So what about vote hemp acres? Vote hemp acres are in there. But those are acres, it's a simple survey that's sent across by Vote Hemp to all the regulatory agencies to get that information. Redding equipment, not equipment in the US for redding hemp fiber. Well, it depends upon the redding process that you're talking about. So most of the fiber processors that are growing fiber are laying it down with a sickle bar mower. Then you let it naturally wet. So it may be a week to 2 week to 3 week process, depending upon temperatures and moisture, and they allow that natural wet to take place. There are other companies that are looking at chemically retting that. So you would harvest it green potentially, or at least dry down, and then they would chemically ret that. But each one of those processes comes with a different cost of production and has different tolerances to it. So there are several different things that are going on. there's just differences among the redding practices. So I think that's an area within the U.S. that needs a lot of work still, is on the redding technologies and what is the proper redding methods to take place for hemp producers going forward. And it is a bottleneck in the system right now because if it's redded really well, it tends to go into the processing plant in much better shape. If it's not redded well, then it doesn't come apart in the processing facility very well. So that is a problem. The 2018 Farm Bill, while I was reporting how many acres you have an issue, under the 2018 Farm Bill, it's not an issue because you're required to fill out the Farm Service Agency report. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, you are not. So that is the big difference between those two farm bills. Under the CBD budgets, which has been the product or the end product that has been driving the market, what you can see across this is we all come up in this $12,000 to $15,000 returns of variable cost. And this is really, really, really one point that I want people to take home is this is a really expensive crop to grow. And to make a profit on this, you really got to watch these numbers right here in these variable costs. And a lot of this is wrapped up in labor and in your plant costs. So one thing that you're going to hear me come back to at the end is make sure you know what your per plant cost is, whether you're using feminized seed and growing those and doing direct seeding or direct seeding those into trays and transplanting them, or you're purchasing clones. That is probably the single biggest cost right now for this side. These costs will continue to come down as this industry continues to mature and we get more and more seed production, clone production taking place in the industry, and as that part of the industry kind of catches up with the number of acres that are out there. So, and as seed technology gets better and better and better. So, and these are mostly on, these are quote unquote conventional production. However, there are no really, there are very few chemicals that are available to move this into a true organic type system, or most all this is almost organic in production as it currently stands, because there are very few chemicals. Most of them are on the B25 list, which most, I think, I'm not an agronomist or a chemical specialist, but I think that you can definitely find most of those chemicals on an organic approved list. So all that's available for chemicals, herbicides, insecticides, pesticides are on that B25 list. Very few, if any, others available. So this is almost an organic production system as it stands, but it wouldn't classify as organic unless that land is certified organic. So hopefully I didn't make too big of a mess out of that. Yes, the details of what's available in the variable cost on a CBD per acre are all in the budget. If you look at the University of Kentucky Industrial Hemp webpage, you can find my full downloadable budget there. It breaks it out in pretty gross detail in terms of, seed or clones, fertilizers, chemicals, so on and so forth, all the way down to land cost and all the way down to equipment fixed cost as well. So that is the best place to go do that. Yes, fertilizer is in there as well. You're seeing kind of fertilizer rates all over the place. A lot of the data out of North Carolina suggests less than, that number's slipping my mind. I want to say less than 200 pounds per acre for N, but it may be even less than that. North Carolina State University has a pretty good website out there that talks about fertilizer usage. Let me continue onward. As I was talking about in that budget, I did put this in here. This is an older hemp benchmarks document, but you can see those cost of clones. This was early 2020. We're still at between $1.75 and $4.50 per clone. So when you start thinking about the number of clones per acre, or maybe 1,500 to 3,500 or 4,000 an acre, that adds up pretty quickly. Industrialized seed, this right here, what they're talking about, this is for the fiber and grain side of things. So these are much lower costs, and keep in mind they're on a per pound basis, not a per plant basis. CBD seed, non-feminized, not too bad. Feminized seed is pretty pricey. We've also seen some thoughts about moving into the CBG market. CBG is another cannabinoid that is available in that. They're very expensive per plant or per seed as well, and per clone. So this is another side of the market that seems to be coming along. And the University of Kentucky website that you're looking for is the University of Kentucky Industrial Hemp page. It's also listed on the page that Catherine showed earlier. There's a link there for that. Let's talk a little bit about pricing and kind of what we've seen. So 2019, we came into this year, into 2019, prices were looking up, lots of contracts signed in about July 19, sometime in July of 19, those prices really started to skid as we see more and more acres hit into that production process. So we were over 450,000 acres licensed that year. You know, so we started to see price decline as people were trying to figure out, can we actually use and consume all of this CBD that was being produced. Since January of 2020, we've seen the prices hold pretty steady under $1 a point, $1 per percent CBD. This is, and you ask about biomass, this is basically whole plant. This is not what the definition of biomass is. I'm talking about harvesting the whole plant. I'm not talking about bucked floral material. You could get a higher price for that, but you're going to have lower amounts of material available there. So biomass would be basically the whole plant in this scheme. So, and this is really the number that I tend to think about telling all of our producers to think about is how do you produce in this market, or how do you produce this crop for under and make a profit for under $1 a point. So I think long term, I think that's where we're going, is keeping this price pretty low. So it's not this $4 and $5 per point that we saw. We did see a slight bump in this price. If you looked really closely, and I had everything zoomed in, sometime in August as new production was coming into play for the 2020 year. But that's kind of evaporated now as all the other states have started bringing their harvest to market as well. You can see some differences across the country in terms of pricing. So if you'll notice in the Northeast tends to have the highest midpoint and some of the higher prices across the country. I think some of that is a function of their smaller groups, smaller organizations. And that previous price was in dollars per point. So this is still in dollars per percent CBD right here. So you can see that the Northeast still has some of the higher prices across the country. Kentucky tends to have a pretty low price. Oregon right now is struggling to actually even put out a price given all the wildfires that have taken place there. So that's, let's see. I did also stick in some prices in here in the refined products. So these refined products are the crude, the full spectrum, broad spectrum, and isolates that are coming out of this. And you can kind of see from November of 19, these prices have continually fell. And I think over time, these prices will continue to come down as we become more and more efficient in producing these products. A lot of these processors are small batch processors. As they become larger, they'll get more efficient in their products as well. And I'll come back to a lot of the questions in the chat box at the end. Let's talk a little bit about risk management. So I'm going to change gears on you a little bit. So in the contracting space, I would say that if I were going to get into this, these are some questions that I'm starting to ask myself and make sure I understand and have a really good handle on for my contract that I'm going to sign, if I can find a contract, and the state that I'm going to produce it in. So what are the state laws and regulations? So different states have different rules and regs. So keep in mind, we've still got the 2014 Farm Bill still in place. So that means a state like Tennessee that is a total a THCA state, that is their standard. A state like Kentucky is a total THC state. That that implies that number, that 0.3% is calculated differently in those two states. So it may be a competitive advantage or disadvantage depending upon the state you're in. And other states are going to have that. If you're under the 2018 Farm Bill, it is a strict 0.3% THC with a allowable variance on either side of that. What happens if pre-harvest THC goes above the allowable limit? Who's responsible for that? Typically that'll be the producer, but it could be somebody else. It could be the processor. It all depends on how it's written in the contract. What happens if post THC goes above the allowable limit? How will that be handled? When will CBD or essential oil tests take place? I've seen some contracts where they pay on what happens in that final COA or that certificate of analysis at the farm level. And I've seen some processors wait until after it's been processed all the way through their process, and then they pay based on the certificate of analysis of that product after it's been processed. It can be different numbers. Just need to make sure that you understand where that point is at. Who's responsible is Hemp, is Seeds. Who's providing the plant materials or genetics? This becomes important in the crop insurance side of things, because if the processor is providing the crop or is providing the plant material, then that means that the farm is only providing management and resources to produce that crop. So they may not be the ones that are actually technically liable, which may exclude them from getting a contract or getting crop insurance for that crop. So it become like a poultry contract. So you can't get insurance on poultry because the company actually owns the birds. You don't own the birds. So the liability shifts responsibility there. So just word of warning there, and there are odd and end things that take place. How and when will the money change hands? Is it up front? Is it at the back? You may also think about, can you get an escrow up front for some of that money to offset some of those costs? Because remember, if we look back at those production costs, $14,000 to $15,000 an acre is a pretty expensive production cost. The pilot program for crop insurance was actually available in 21 states, but not even all the counties in those 21 states. You will notice Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, a few other states up here were not included in that pilot program. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out this year. And I've got a couple numbers on how many policies were written for that, but we'll talk about that here in a second. There were policies written or contracts, types of policies you could get on CBD. There were transplants, direct seeded, floral whole plant. You can get certified organic, organic transitional, and non-irrigated and irrigated. And you can do the same thing on the grain and fiber. So just so that you know that these are out there and available to producers. In 2020, for the RMA multi-peril crop insurance pilot policies, there were about 699 of those written, which is quite a low number given the number of producers that are out there growing this crop. This, to me, indicates that there are very few contracts available for producers to even get crop insurance. So you had to have a contract to qualify for crop insurance, plus you also had to have a year of production and a few other things that go along with that. And RMA's website outlines all the requirements for that. There were also some 447 policies sold under whole farm, which is under under NAP policies, which is non-federally insured crop programs. And I probably messed up that acronym as well. But there are 447 of those available or that were written out there. So you can see that there were very, very few hemp policies for crop insurance written this year. I know in the state of Kentucky, one of the local individuals, crop insurance writers, he had written like 3 policies, but they never could get a contract to actually make those policies stick. So that is a problem in the industry right now. If you look at that, if you look at it by state, what you're going to see is Kentucky had quite a few policies. North Carolina had quite a few policies. Montana, Minnesota, Tennessee, Virginia, and Colorado. So, I mean, a lot of the larger states that have been producing hemp for a number of years where a lot of those policies were written. NAP contracts are kind of across the board as well. So it just kind of gives you a snapshot of where in the country some of these policies are. Let's talk a bit about storage. Storage, I think, is going to continue to be an issue for this industry. A lot of producers in 2019 had to figure out how to store a lot of this product for a long period of time. They may even still be holding on to it because they didn't want to sell it. So storage is a problem, 6 to 12 months, maybe more. So you need to think about how you're going to store this. Are you going to store it in super sacks in a dry area? Are you going to process this onto crude? That costs more money. So just how are you going to store this? And it can also have an impact on other commodities, especially in the grain side of things and the fiber side of things. If you're eating up grain bins to store this commodity, if you're a grain producer, or you're eating up indoor space to store the fiber till it can be taken to the processor and get processed. So one thing on the grain side of things that I have seen is it requires a lot more management in terms of keeping that grain dry, cool, and mold out of it. So in Canada, which is a country that's pretty proficient in grain production, they would have these elevated bins with cone-shaped bottoms, and they would circulate this grain on a fairly regular basis. That's not something we normally do in the U.S. But keep in mind this: a lot of this on the grain and the essential oil side is going into the food market. So improper storage could create off flavors. Drying methods is another one. This is something else to consider looking into. One of the studies that we have going on at the University of Kentucky right now is trying to figure out what is the best drying method and how does that preserve the profile of the hemp plant. So how does it preserve the cannabinoid profile and does it make a difference on the drying method that you choose to do that? We are seeing some differences. We only have really 1 year's worth of data and it's very preliminary, but we see that a lot of the heated drying, so if you're going to dry it in a peanut wagon, or these are tobacco barns out of the North Carolina area, or hops dryer, or our traditional tobacco barns, it's important to take care on how you're going to do that. So if you put heat to it, we have seen that that can really degrade the CBD content, so that makes it worth less when you get it to the market. So one thing that really did kind of piqued our interest is that freeze drying actually worked really well for us. However, there's a cost to that. So this has kind of got me pulling my hair out on what is the best option to choose. I'm going to delve into the consumer side just a little bit because I think this is another area that needs a lot of work from an economic perspective, and then a lot of it has to do with education of consumers and what is this product, what are the issues that consumers have with it, and how are we going to solve those. So we have a large project getting ready to get kicked off in January, surveying consumers, talking about regulations, what type of regulations are in this industry, what type of labels need to be added, and do those consumers believe what's on those regulations and on the labels going forward. And also Jane Kodowski there at Vermont is doing some work on this. She has an interesting paper out in sustainability and has a couple more in process looking at 2019 and 2020 consumer surveys for hemp consumers. These are two third-party surveys that are out there. The first one was done in the EU. The second one was done in the US. Both these are done under New Frontier data. I will tell you, if you go try and look these up, New Frontier data has a paywall, so you won't be able to get access to this, but these two consumer surveys are out there. And both of them have to do with awareness and use of CBD. So if you look at that, in the U.S., about 86% have heard of CBD. In the UK, or sorry, EU, 56% have. So there's still an education problem here of everybody understanding what it is, and if you look at that survey more in depth, a lot of consumers tend to not be able to tell the difference between hemp oil and CBD oil. So they're not the same product. One, the hemp oil is produced from grain and extracting the oil there. CBD oil is produced through the extraction process to go on to CBD. So there is a lot of confusion that takes place. A lot of the big concerns are probably things that you think about as well, if you and have considered as you if you take the product. So quality, number one. Dosing accuracy, I think this is a huge problem, and we need the medical community really to step in. A lot of the dosing requirements have been driven off of Epidiolex and just changed by body weight. So we need to figure out if that's the correct way to do that, and the medical community will have to weigh in on that. Contaminants within it, taste, legal status, presence of THC. So all these are on the concern side. And we need to educate the consumer and alleviate some of these major concerns if we really want the essential oil CBD side of this market to take off. There's another survey out there talks about the lack of CBD standards and impact on demand, and it has a significant impact on demand, saying that CBD usage dropped sharply when consumers learned FDA has no standards on that. So that is a problem that needs to get fixed, and it continues to plague the industry. Average monthly spending in the U.S., about 60% of the consumers spend less than $50 a month on CBD. So not as much spending on it as you would think. So if you're going to take quite a bit of it, it gets pretty expensive to do that. The EU, if you were to do the conversions, would be something very similar. One thing that the Pan-X Exchange does is a short survey at the end, and it's a question: which of the following factors would boost the growth of the hemp market the most? Positive ruling from the FDA on CBD and other cannabinoids to be used in food ingredients. Or another way to put that is a clarification of rules and regulations for CBD usage in the U.S. So a lot of people filling out this believe that that would be a huge positive boom for this industry. Touch on the international markets just a little. So some things that have been happening in the EU. EU just increased its allowable THC limit from 0.2 to 0.3. So that's going to open up some additional varieties, additional production, and may make them more competitive with us in terms of CBD production, which we were hoping that that would be a market that we could really tap into. Something else that's also happened in Italy in the last couple of weeks, it bans over-the-counter CBD supplements for food. There's going to be lots of court battles ensue, and confusion is really across the EU on this topic. If you follow any of the international markets, I'm just beginning to follow a lot more of this. So this is an area that is of extreme interest to me, though, going down the road. Let's see, anything else in terms of the essential, in terms of this? I think that's the majority of it. The only other thing that I might say on the essential oil side of this is that some trade agreements that we have in the U.S. with other countries require 0 THC or 0.1% THC. So those are other issues that are on the forefront that we could have to deal with that would impact the expansion of this industry internationally. I did stick Canada Acres in here. This is a big competitor for us. This is more on the grain side of things. They've been very good at grain production and are well out in front of us. And they've also now introduced a essential oils side to this market as well, which will be a competitor for us. And then I stuck in here raw hemp. So we've seen for the fiber industry individuals, it's kind of peaked out around here, but a lot of it's coming out of Europe. We might actually see some of this peak up we might actually import less if we can get the fiber industry figured out. We've got a lot of genetics issues to deal with, along with getting industries set up for that product to go into. So tips and considerations. One of the first things I tend to think about is cash flow. Can I make this crop cash flow for me? Most of the time, I'm probably not going to be able to go to banks and get a loan, so that's going to be a problem. So where am I going to get the money from to fund some of the cost per acre that I showed earlier? Where's this money going to come from? Is it going to come out of other crops? If I'm using operating loans for other crops to support my hemp crop, that can also create problems for the banking industry because you borrowed money with the intention of using it for corn and beans and used it for hemp. So that's technically a huge problem for them. It could be potentially considered mortgage fraud or fraud in terms of operating loans. And what is my ability to bear risk as a financial operation? Or what's your ability to bear financial risk in your operation? So you really need to know that this is not a crop to save the farm. This is a crop to add to the mix. If I were going to grow hemp, I would really spend a lot of time researching the company I was contracting, spend a lot of time looking at the financial health of that business, and looking at any type of who the investors are, and trying to dig down deep into that. I would probably try and get some sort of contract that stipulates money to be partially paid up front, maybe put in an escrow account. I would also want to think about looking at companies that offer what I'm going to call a partnership contract, or some type of contract that allows you to stay in that product all the way through retail sales, so you capture a portion of that. Or I may end up thinking about developing a vertically integrated company myself. Why? Because I want to try and shorten this supply chain down some. So maybe I want to have the cultivation piece. We're going to have the testing piece and transportation, but I want all this to be handled potentially and shorten the supply chain as much as possible and stay in it as long as possible. So I want to have some vertical integration and capture those, capture the value at each point in the supply chain. So right now, I think that there's a lot of money to be, or there is money to be made in the R&D seed side of things, which is still really expensive, and at the extraction process. But I want to be able to capture profit from multiple pieces of that. Also, I'm really going to think about purchasing genetics. Make sure and research the genetic suppliers you're looking at. Prices are all over the place. The certificate of analysis that I've seen for some of these varieties that have been put out, and I'm sure this will come up later. And the genetics just aren't stable for a lot of these varieties or cultivars that are out there. I'd also want to establish what a plan B is. So this is something that happened to a lot of Kentucky producers. Is we were used to operating in the traditional commodity market. We take our corn, we take our beans, we take it to the elevator, a check shows up in a week later. That was not the case with much of this hemp. There was contracts that went bad, companies that went bankrupt, and you may not get paid 60, 90, 80, or 60, 90, 180 days out. And how am I going to handle that in terms of cash flow? Ask from others about their experiences, involve a lawyer as well. So just a different industry to be involved in. I think there are a lot of expectations kind of going forward. I think we've seen a resetting of the market and expectations. We've seen prices come down significantly. I don't see them spiking back up. There's a lot of argument over THC limits, the 0.3% THC, and should that be raised to 1? If it's raised to 1, that probably puts downward pressure on the number of acres that are needed to produce the amount of CBD for the U.S. So there's trade-offs there, genetic improvements, but we need some rules and regs in place. So a lot of our breeders have the ability to do really cool things and really push this industry forward fast. But are they breeding for 0.3% THC? Or are they breeding for 1% THC? Can they utilize plant stock or seed stock that's above the 0.3% to breed with lower THC varieties and create hybrids? So there's lots of questions in that. Increases in licensed acres and growers. I think this is going to continue to see an upward trend a little bit as we continue to get more and more groups involved. Still steep learning curves. The hemp, the 2014 Farm Bill has been extended. Minimal contract availability. We're going to still see bankruptcies, reorgs, and consolidation as this industry moves forward. I see it every day as companies buy up one another, and they're reorganizing to try and figure out how to get into this market and how to make profit in this market. So with that, I know I've covered a lot of ground, and I'll try and now swing back to the Q&A. So is it possible, now I can't talk, to process wet hemp biomass and still make a profit? So there are a number of companies out there that are doing a green chop on specifically with CBD varieties. They're running it through a silage chopper and then going and either drying that or extracting that directly out. Yeah, there's some potential for that, but that creates some bottlenecks in terms of how quickly you got to move that from the field onto that processor. And I'm hopeful somebody will talk about that in some sort of the production practices part of this seminar later on. But yes, it is possible to do that. We have had a number of companies in the state of Kentucky do that model. How do the economics of processing all the biomass versus separating the flower from the rest of the biomass and selling the flowers to the smokable market compare? So that's a great question. In the state of Kentucky, we are not allowed to do smokable products. So we could, we can strip those flowers out and take them to another state and do that. But we're not technically allowed to sell smokables in the state. The smokable market, from what I can tell, has been more profitable recently than processing the biomass into essential oils in some cases. So yeah, that's definitely a possibility to look at. It's not a budget that I've started to put together yet, but it is something that we probably need to start looking into, as an option. I know there are several cigarette companies that are also looking into that. So, what do you use biomass for and to sell it at this price? So the biomass that I was speaking about was biomass that would go into essential oil production. So essential oils would be extracted from that and the sell. And I think that, and to sell it at this price. So those are the prices that we're seeing reported across the market. Have doubt in the figures of the calculations of total costs under Cornell and University and Penn State in the grain budget comparison. Those budgets were set up by each of those different universities, and they had their reasons for how they included different things. I don't think there's been a consensus yet on what the best management and production practices are for these, and it kind of varies by state. So I think that's one of the things that you're seeing on the grain comparison come out. One other thing too may be that we have a processor in the state of Kentucky for grain, so we have local market access, so maybe higher prices are a little higher there. Would be one idea. But I don't remember all the details in the Cornell budget and the Missouri budget and the Penn State budget on the grain. But as I said, all those are publicly available, so feel free to go look at those. What is the typical crop insurance coverage that we can get for hemp now? What types of losses are covered? It's an actual production history type contract, so it's a lot of yield is the big thing that's in that. There have been several thefts in BY, and the police don't know how to value the crop. You have to steal a significant amount of the crop to actually have a viable product to sell. So, I mean, by the time you go through the extraction process, now the smokable market may be a little bit different in that you don't have to go through their extraction process, but we've had a number of thefts in Kentucky as well. I think somebody came at me with a year or so ago with they had stole like 50 plants. Well, 50 plants isn't going to get you very far in terms of a value for that crop. So you're going to need much larger quantities than that to really have a lot of value there, unless they're somehow selling it, I don't know, potentially on the black market, as marijuana or something, and claiming it has a much higher THC content than it should have as hemp. So that's a great question. But I've had some people come at me, and right now we haven't had to really get down and value that. Why are New Hampshire? New Hampshire and Vermont were not included in that, I think because of the number of acres. But the company that got that contract to do that was out of Texas. And I'm not sure exactly what their thresholds were for acres of hemp production that they included in or how they determined who was in and who was out of the pilot program. It was kind of interesting that especially Vermont wasn't included, as they were one of the original states with hemp production, but and it may also have been lack of data that they could get on those. So they didn't really come out and give a good answer as to why certain states were not included. My impression is that many producers are not securing markets or even looking for them prior to harvest. Have you seen this? And have you heard of many growers just not finding markets at all? I've been concerned about overproduction for too small of a market. Yes, I think overproduction is a problem here. We've seen, I think a lot of producers came into this thinking that this was going to be a market like they were used to in the corn, beans, and these other commodity markets, and I'll produce it and there will be a market and we will be able to find a place to put this. That's just not the way that this market is developed. These are a different set of players. It's a different market. It's a different uses. So yes, overproduction is a problem. Finding markets is a problem. Finding contracts is an even bigger problem. And until we have a good picture of how big this market actually is, I think it's going to continue to be a problem. You know, I'm working now on some back of the envelope numbers and trying to get those validated to how much CBD actually even needs to be produced to fill the U.S. market. So I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out. That's another project that's coming. Italy's ban is not for topical use CBD. Cheryl, I don't know the specifics of that off the top of my head, but that headline kind of caught my eye, and I was digging into it a little bit, but I haven't dug all the way into all the specifics on the topical ban. The way it seems is just from the minor reading I've done on it, it didn't specify whether it was topical and ingestible, but I was reading that quickly. Which countries require 0.1% THC? Most of these are Southeast Asia countries that we've done work with. Heard that are, most of that is in their rules and regs. Country specific, I want to say Indonesia was one of those, Thailand maybe another one, but there were several Southeast Asian countries that was the issue. Do you think the limit will ever be raised from 0.3 to 0.5? You know, that's the nice part about being an economist. I don't really have to get into that speculation game. What I like to do is, what are the implications of raising it from 0.3 to 0.5? You know, so long story short, it doesn't really matter to me whether it's increased or decreased. I just like to look at the differences and what advantages and disadvantages it has. I think there could be a push, and there will continue to probably be a push to actually probably push that closer to 1%. But keep in mind, there are trade-offs when you do that. So if we go from 0.3 to 0.5, with respect to it, when we go to 0.3 to 0.5, that's going to put downward pressure on the number of acres needed. So as I said, feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. May not have all the answers, but I'm definitely willing to look for those and provide some feedback. So
thank you.
Pleasure speaking with today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tyler. We appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for sticking on so we get the questions answered.